Hi there, I'm Philip Heitzen, the founder of Art of Procurement. And at Art of Procurement, we help procurement professionals like you plan and deliver change with confidence. Whether it's through the mapping and prioritization of your change journey, securing the subject matter expertise that you need to help you along the way, or assisting you and your team to take action on what they learn, and what's really important is on also what they already know. And of course, a big part of what we do is this weekly podcast where we share strategies and tactics that aim to inspire and help elevate your change journey. I want to thank you for joining me today. Let's go straight into the show. Hi there, welcome to episode 238 of the Art of Procurement podcast. Now, before I jump into today's conversation, I wanted to let you know that we just started a new webinar series. It's called AOP Live, something I've wanted to create for a long time, so I'm really excited to actually finally bring this to light and get our first AOP Live in the books. So my intention with AOP Live is actually to bring the podcast into a live environment so that you can ask the questions. You can ask them beforehand and in real time during the discussion, making it much more of a participatory conversation than a typical podcast would be. And if all goes well, we're planning on one AOP Live per month. Now, our first AOP Live is with Sameli Samalkorpi of procurement analytics company Ciervo. That's going to take place on February the 14th at 1 p.m. US Eastern Time. We'll be talking about how to get started with using AI in procurement. So to register, just to check it out, if you want to look into this in a little bit more details, to submit any questions that you might have in advance, just head on over to artofprocurement.com/AOP Live. That's artofprocurement.com/AOP Live. All the information that you need is going to be right there. And I hope to see you there at AOP Live, again, February the 14th. So into today's podcast conversation, and I'm joined by Jens Hentschel. Jens is founder and CEO of the FIVIS partnership. It's a consultancy and training company based in London. So Jens focuses on the importance of customer-centricity in procurement as part of procurement transformation and as part of skills development. And according to Jens, much of procurement is missing the big picture. So we're toiling away in tactical isolation when a mindset shift is really needed. Rather than trying to carve out a bigger role on taking more tasks, Jens advocates for procurement to make an investment in more meaningful connections. So while we know the raw materials that are being purchased, if we don't understand the needs of the end customer, our impact is a little bit more limited. So customer centricity, as you know if you've listened to a number of the shows, is something I passionately believe in. It's something that I really wanted to put into place when I was on the practitioner side within procurement. I talk a little bit more about that in the conversation with Jens. So what we do is we deep dive on why customer centricity is so important, and also why it's so difficult and likely to be often overlooked by procurement teams that are just really, really busy, and you kind of struggle to take the step back to look at things in a more customer-centric way. As usual, I'm going to go into the conversation right now by asking Jens if he found procurement, or did procurement find him?
I think I'm mostly like 95% of your listeners and everyone that works in procurement. I've never heard of procurement before. I just ended up in procurement. I still remember, so I started my procurement career in Procter & Gamble many, many moons ago. And I remember when I was interviewing at P&G, I went to a job fair actually to get my first proper job. And I wanted to interview with Toyota. And I walked by that Procter & Gamble stand, and they were handing out perfumes for free because they still had that perfume business. Right. And then being a student, being poor, right, I obviously got interested in the perfume. I just wanted to grab the free perfume, wander off to the Toyota stand. And they involved me into a quick discussion around who Procter & Gamble is and what they do and what the values are. And they really got me intrigued. And there were some people from procurement. They were recruiting for the purchasing department.
Yeah.
And I dropped my CV, and then 6 months later, I was starting a job in their headquarters in Switzerland, which was good. But up to that very moment, I didn't have a clue what procurement was. I mean, I had some courses at my university business school in the Netherlands where we were talking about procurement as a process, but not necessarily of all the great stuff that procurement entails, to understand the market, to understand an internal need and requirement, to travel the world, to influence industry, all these cool stuff that, we all doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
This is something that I only learned slowly but steadily, after I had started at P&G. So yeah, procurement probably found me, and not the other way around, I'd say.
Yeah, it's interesting that, so many of us, like you said, kind of fell into it that way. And that was certainly my story of falling in and being assigned as well into a big company and their procurement team, not having a clue what I was supposed to do and kind of making it up as I went along, but enjoying all the travel and the, I guess what I believed at a very young age was, more influence than I may have had in other positions. A lot of people that we talk to all feel that. So I wonder what we can do to actually get the word out a little bit more so that people aspire to be in procurement, because there's a lot of good things obviously about the profession, but you don't have many people saying, I want to go in procurement.
No, you're absolutely right there, Phil. And what I always found a little bit frustrating, I was working for different organizations after P&G, and when you go into these organizations, you give a presentation about what procurement does, all the fun bits, et cetera, all of a sudden you get a lot of excitement about it. Wow, this is what procurement is all about. Mm-hmm. You see, even in mature organizations, people struggle to understand that. They consider it as a black box to a certain degree. Yeah. And it's probably down to us, as you say, to explain this a bit better. I think we've probably, sometimes I describe it as we are this function that sits in the basement somewhere, and we only see the day of the light when either a contract has expired, a supply issue has arisen, or somebody, bumps at us at the Christmas party. That is pretty much a three occasion where we actually interact with the, outside world. And it's a bit unfortunate because there's so many facets to this function. And maybe what we need to do is just to get out there a bit more often to be as cool and exciting as a marketing function. Mm-hmm. I mean, last organization that I worked for, they had a, very, very good marketing team. And when there was a, big get together, like a town hall meeting, they presented, the exciting stuff that they were doing, like the new advertisement, right? Yeah. And everybody got super hyped up and, wow, great marketing, you guys, you rule the world. Yeah. And I was wondering, okay, why can we not do the same as procurement? Why don't we, take a little bit of money and time and give an exciting presentation and maybe put the 3 words of content that you probably can put into one PowerPoint slide also into an exciting movie, or talk about a supplier or an industry that is completely, upside down and the challenge that we're facing. I think we need to become a bit more marketing like. And I think the procurement mentality though, right, is that, well, if you can say it in 3 words, say it in 3 words, right? Mm-hmm.
We're not as strong at telling stories, are we? Telling good stories. And not telling stories meaning fiction, but actually, sharing our message perhaps in different ways. I'm doing a lot of work right now on branding, and probably by the time the pod goes out, the fruits of that work will be out there, and may have been out there for a few weeks. But there's so much that goes on to trying to tell your story in a different way, to try and then inspire people to take action, that I don't think we focus a lot of time on when we're talking about what we do, when we're talking to people outside the function.
No, you're absolutely right. And then, how we all take it, it's about stories. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. And I think we have so many stories to tell. It's not, okay, we deliver 3% savings versus a budget. I mean, that's the message that we want to relay somewhere in our presentation. But why don't we tell a story, right? That, look, we went to a supplier in India and we've uncovered some issues there, and then we resolved the supply chain, made it more sustainable in the language, in words that people can understand. Yeah. I mean, I clearly remember a situation where I gave no rocket science whatsoever, just a presentation that was really was telling a story. And then I remember that somebody from the HR team came to me after that presentation and said that he got like 8 requests from people that wanted to join the procurement team straight after. So it's just these simple things, right, that we probably could do to be a bit more visible. And the other thing, I guess, is we need to be more out there at universities and really tell our story there. I mean, there's more university programs. At least I see some here in Europe that are popping up that focus a bit more on procurement / supply chain management. But I think there's probably still more work that needs to be done to really, position procurement in a certain way, to position us as a commercial function.
Yeah.
And it all ties in together, right? We want to have a seat at the table. It's a never-ending story. If you look on LinkedIn, I think every second article is about we need to have a seat at the table.
Right.
But I'm fully convinced that we can and we should. But we need to explain it also to the CEO and CFO and what we can bring. And this commercial thinking combined with knowing the outside world is a valuable asset that we're probably not exploiting enough and not explaining enough to all of the stakeholders that we're interacting with, unfortunately.
Do you think that sometimes the idea of the black box that you mentioned earlier, it's kind of come from the evolution of the profession, and in a way it was our way of just asking people to leave us to our own devices. Like we'll deliver some savings for you, we'll justify our ROI by delivering some savings, but don't ask me how I do it. And so we're a little bit more, or it's come from a background of being a little bit more insular, and it's sometimes hard to break out of that.
No, I totally agree with you, right? I mean, this is probably what's the probability, not the probability, the philosophy over the last 30 years, right? I mean, spend consolidation, creating this market power, in the market versus a supplier to, deliver great savings. And I think when you look into where we came from, procurement organization, global procurement organization started in the late 80s, early 90s, with, the globalization, the Far East open up as a market. We were tremendously successful in delivering savings right, left, and center, right? And I think we just continued on this kind of, we know pretty much this mentality of we know what we're doing, just leave us alone.
Yeah.
And I was in the situation myself as well, where I was managing spends for different business units, and I was under the impression, just leave me alone. I know this raw material well enough that I don't need input from you, business unit leader, on what you need. Right? I know exactly I have never spoken to you. I've never seen your end consumer, but I know this raw material. And if you want to change your specification, well, it costs you dearly, so we're not going to do it anyways. And I probably didn't care if my approach had an implication on the supply chain, on sales, because I had a different target. My boss wanted me to deliver 3% savings year on year. And it worked. And I don't get me wrong, I don't want to, leave the impression to your listeners and to yourself that I want to belittle what we've delivered over the last decades. I mean, we delivered tremendous cost improvement and cost optimizations, but I think we lost sight, though, on what the internal stakeholder, what the internal customer actually wants, and sometimes it's probably no longer savings.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yes, I think we probably got into a certain rhythm, and we stuck into that, and it's now very difficult to break out of this routine, I suppose. Yeah,
to me, it's all just about, so I look at where we came from and how we have grown and the value that we have brought to our organizations, and, just things change. So it's not that we did things badly or wrongly, or we should have done things differently. It's just an evolution, and it's a natural evolution of what businesses need, of what we're capable of. And sometimes that requires, a little bit of help and some mindset shifts, to start thinking a little bit differently. But we were being, everything's very situational. So we were doing what it called for at the time that our organizations needed, and just what our companies need change. And we have to figure out how to change with it.
No, I agree with you, absolutely. But I think what we see out there with businesses, they all focus on the customer, right? Yeah. I mean, with all these, digitization, I mean, if you look into just the B2C world for a moment, right? I mean, we all know, we all use Amazon, we all use Uber, and we have certain expectations as customers, and we want to have, our needs fulfilled in a very customized way as well. We no longer want to have an off-the-shelf product. And that requires, obviously, a supply chain and procurement function and suppliers to be able to react to changing customer demand in a very, very speedy way as well. Mm-hmm. And this means that sometimes when you have big scale in the market and you squeeze your supply to the nth degree, that maybe that flexibility and customization that actually required on the end consumer stage is no longer there. So to your point, I think we need to reflect on what is really required. And probably most of us have or still do report into finance organizations where maybe the CFO says, look, I want the savings, and then that's it. And I think that's where we need to step up and challenge probably also our direct superiors and say, look, I don't think that you still want to have savings. We need to have a discussion with the business, with the CEO, to see maybe we need to even increase spend to a certain degree. I mean, I have one example that really opened my eyes when I was working for KFC. I had one person in my team, and we were buying a certain food ingredient. And you can obviously drive savings very quickly by just lowering the spec, lowering the quality on the food ingredient. And this is what he was trying to do. He said, look, Jens, I can deliver 10% savings on this food ingredient by changing from a supplier in Western Europe to a supplier in Eastern Europe. And job done. And, then hopefully I'm going to get my promotion. And then I was challenging him on this. So what's going to happen if the quality is not the same, and if a restaurant customer, KFC customer, comes into a restaurant and is having a less of an experience than before, 6 months before, will that not impact sales? And I think his immediate reply was, well, I don't know. I mean, marketing is dealing with customers, right? Yeah. And this is exactly it, right? Yeah. You need to establish this mentality of customer centricity, of being a business owner, to see, okay, if it was my business, would I buy this lower quality ingredient, or would I not opt for the stuff that drives higher sales? I mean, the profits still need to be there. I totally get that, right? But this holistic thinking needs to be there, and not this silo approach. I follow my scorecard, and all the rest is somebody else's responsibility. Is no longer how we should act as procurement.
Yeah, I feel that at its heart, the idea of customer centricity, in the context of the end customer, that we often look at ourselves and think, well, we're buying or helping the business buy what they want to buy, which I think is a very reactive kind of perspective, rather than we'll actually help them identify and determine what they can buy to have a more positive effect on the customer. It assumes a more of a consultative and a business partnering approach, rather than just buying kind of to spec. But obviously that's super hard for somebody to take that position, within an organization, to be trusted in that way. It's something that doesn't happen overnight. So I know that you're seeing a lot of organizations through your work that are kind of struggling on that journey of how to become a little bit more trusted, so that you are able to be proactive rather than reactive. I just wonder if you could share some of the things that you see that organizations start to do to build up that, I don't know, kind of that recognition, if you will, and that influence with some of their business partners, so that they can have a say in the conversation in what will actually impact the customer.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. It is not easy, especially if you have a bit of a history of being that black box function in the basement. Then you cannot change that reputation from one day to the other. It is a journey, right? And I think that's what a lot of sometimes procurement leaders underestimate, that it is a process, and it cannot, as I said, done overnight.
There's no switch.
But for me, there's no switch, unfortunately. Yeah. But for me, it's more of, it always starts with the right strategy and the right leadership in the procurement organization to really showcase we are now a customer-centric service organization. We're no longer just the gatekeeper of a certain savings targets. To encourage the junior buyer that just started 2 weeks ago, up to the manager, to really think in a customer-centric way, and to allow also for people not necessarily deliver on a scorecard, but to challenge first within the organization, is what we've done last year still good enough for this year? This continuous improvement, and really this business ownership mentality. And I think it really starts with saying, okay, this is now what we want to do as an organization. This is our strategy. I mean, I was reading a statistic the other day that only 60% of procurement organizations have actually a strategy in place, right? And I would probably say what I've seen mostly in my work is these strategies that people claim to have in place are probably most likely something around, this is the savings target year on year, and that is our strategy. Yeah. And I think it starts there. If you really want to change your organization, you need to step up as a leader and define a customer-centric strategy that is discussed and aligned with your internal stakeholders. That say, okay, for instance, we want to do more on sustainability. Why not make this a big statement in your strategy that procurement is owning and fostering and driving the sustainability agenda for the company? In the end of the day, we know all of our suppliers, right? We visit our suppliers on a regular basis. We can lift the carpet and see what's happening there, and maybe then take that information back into the organization and challenge our CFO and CEO to say, maybe we need to invest 20% more into the supply chain. Yes, it will erode our profit margin, but the business case is X, Y, Z that, 2 years time from now, it will have the right ROI. I think this is the business mindset that we have in us, right? This building a business case, thinking of the ROI. We just need to unleash that and encourage people to do so. But for me, it always starts with somebody is going in with a vision, a mission, and a strategy that drags the organization with them, and to change probably scorecards in a way that savings is not everything, right? And then I've seen that in some teams where people say, yeah, you can, we want to be more customer-centric, but you still need to deliver your savings. I think that doesn't work, right? You need to be more flexible in this, and then probably have a mechanism in place where you can readily decide on business cases, so that procurement people become more of project managers that say, okay, in this project, yes, we will deliver the savings because it's absolutely needed for the business. Project B, though, we will increase costs because overall total cost in use will go down. Or, as I said, we have the sustainability story that most likely will drive sales. This is probably where we need to get to. A lesser focus on the score, hard KPIs, and more of a let's take business ownership and establishing a strategy, though, is key.
Yeah, one of the things I found, and because it's always obviously very hard to change like the value driver or the people's perception of what the procurement value proposition is away from savings, especially when that's how we've conditioned people to think about us and to think about our ROI. What I've found is there's a really strong benefit in having a good governance program in place that really brings in all the leaders across the organization. So thinking about all the people who ultimately have an influence in paying the bill for procurement, bringing those together as part of a governance group with you to help sort of drive your strategy, to help report back on strategies, to set the agenda for some of the projects that you're working on. I found that's a really... It's been very successful for me in putting in place the governance structures like that to take the conversation away from cost savings, because you're deciding on things as an organization rather than just deciding on things based on the savings target that you might have with the CFO.
No, absolutely. I mean, cross-functional alignment is totally key, and where you then also encourage to challenge your peers or even your maybe superiors to say, look, is it really good to qualify the 20th marketing agency, right? Or should we not consolidate it? I mean, this is a discussion that we should be having, right? And that we probably, in the past, what we just said is, no, you're not going to get the 20th marketing agency. It's going to be just these 5, right? Where we have this conversation of benefits and costs and risks versus opportunities. You're absolutely right. And having a cross-functional alignment gives us then this kind of, the assurance that what we're doing is actually the right thing and not something that we came up with ourselves. But I think this challenging mentality is something very important also within the procurement organization. If we don't create this culture of it's okay to ask why we're doing things a certain way. And I think that's something that I learned when I started at P&G. So I came in, as I said, with pretty much zero knowledge about anything probably. And but this is exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted you to ask and challenge the status quo, to challenge the suppliers, to challenge internal processes, and to come up with better ideas and a fresh pair of eyes to do things differently. And then if you can establish that kind of culture within your team, and then also on a cross-functional level, I think this is definitely very powerful then to come up with something that is new and at the same time is in alignment with what other functions want you to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Now within your team, encouraging people to challenge the status quo, is something that I'm certainly very passionate about, but it's also something that requires somewhat of a safe space to be able to do it. I just wonder if you could share any experiences you might have had in helping team members actually feel comfortable in taking calculated risks. Yeah,
I think it's probably more on a managerial level where you need to make sure that you create, as you say, a safe space for somebody to learn and also to fail.
Yeah.
I think that's what I learned very early on in my career, that the expectations might be high, but I always had the feeling that my managers are, for me, okay to do mistakes, and there's somebody that will, step in if it gets out of hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of concept I tried to relate to the teams that I was managing as well. Then later on in my career, to say, okay, look, I give you this area, this category, for instance. I will always be there for you if you have questions, concerns, to help you with a supplier or a difficult situation with an internal customer. I'm here to support you. I will always defend you. What I'm expecting from you, though, is to come up with interesting new ideas on how we can drive value in this particular function.
Yeah.
And as soon as you have a plan, then you come back to me and recommend that to me in terms of, this is what I think we should be doing, Jens. And it might be completely different to what you've been doing before, somebody else has been doing before. And it's totally okay that this might be actually a form of critique on how things have been done before. And I think this is something that keeps the fact that we need to lose our egos, that even if you've been in that job before and you've done it in a certain way, if somebody comes in with a different set of eyes and does it differently and delivers better value, well, that's totally okay, right?
Yeah.
And but I mean, if you create this environment of people go out and brainstorm, come up with ideas, and they take them back to their managers, and you have then a discussion and pretty much an approval process where I say, yes, I like the idea, I back you up on that idea. This is what works very well. But mistakes will happen, and you just need to make them a judgment call as an organization. You obviously don't want to have the most critical spend on somebody that has just 2 months experience, but there's probably certain areas in your spend where you can say, look, that's where you can learn safely.
Yeah. It's like
on
a
how
sandbox.
to negotiate, for instance. Exactly.
Like the impact isn't the impact of mistakes isn't particularly material. It's something that can be undone relatively easily versus some of the bigger contracts or categories that people may be working in.
Correct. And just as a side remark, this is actually what I see as a bit of a challenge to our function now with this digitization and all the software tools that come into play. These safe environments are becoming less and less and less, right? I mean, spend is being consolidated, put on certain platforms. So the spend that remains is sometimes very, very big, right? And there you need to make a call. And can you give that to somebody very junior? And if you do so, what processes do you put in place to give the support to that individual, not to micromanage that individual, but to give the support that they can always come back to you with questions, and that you have this recommendation approval kind of system where people are not feeling left alone, but they still feel empowered and encouraged enough to come up with new things that are customer-centric.
Yeah, that's a whole new conversation, isn't it? Thinking about as the profession evolves, and I agree with you. I feel that what remains of procurement, or what procurement will become, is more than likely having a lot more impact, but it's on a small number of categories with people who are more experienced, and so that does give the question of where's the ladder. So where do people start? Or are we just going to be bringing in people that are already experienced in a category and teaching them some procurement and relationship management or some business acumen skills, as opposed to the more traditional technical procurement knowledge? But, it's something that I don't think that, I think it's something we'll have to figure out as procurement evolves, but that we don't really have answers for at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we are at the brink of something big, and then there's actually another very very interesting topic, and probably will fill another podcast. So, for me, these technological changes is something that we need to embrace, and we need to embrace them quick to actually get rid of all this transactional work that just prevents us from being strategic. Yes, it might look frightening because yes, it could maybe we could lose some jobs along the way, but I think the jobs that will remain are much more strategic and much more fulfilling than what we've done before. I mean, some companies that I work in or worked before, you can see that buyers are probably 80% of the time are just doing transactional stuff in the day, reporting financial data, analyzing the market, understanding is the supplier actually already used by some other subdivision of our company, yes or no. It's just, or unblocking some invoices, following up on a supplier that hasn't delivered. All these kind of things is 80% of the time, and maybe 20% of the time they actually do spend then on strategic thinking, and that is probably then mostly externally focused and not necessarily internally with the internal customer. So I think we should be all happy that finally there is some tools out there that cannot automate the RFQ process, etc., for us then to have more time to do what actually matters, namely to spend some time. And I think, the easiest thing that any procurement leader can do as of tomorrow, say to their team, is go out and spend some time with your end consumer, because that buys you some credit with the internal function. They say, look, you make a deliberate choice, you make it very visible in the organization. We as procurement team, we spend now a day with an end consumer, and maybe you partner with marketing or sales or whoever is with the end consumer anyways. Say, look, we want to understand A to Z where our ingredients go. And that is super powerful that you step up the game pretty much, right? And creates then also a kind of mindset change within your whole procurement organization. Say, oh yeah, interesting. Our leader says we should be doing this, then it's important. So maybe all the 80% of operational things, maybe I need to do it slightly differently. Or the other thing on financial reporting, I'm sorry that I'm jumping a bit around there, sure. But financial reporting is something that I, especially at my time at P&G, we were wasting so much time every quarter to just, predict what the spend is going to be in the next quarter. And I think if you, at the time, and some buyers, we made some analysis, and if you would just do an 80-20 kind of analysis, you would probably get, you would provide a good enough number for the finance organization. So instead of a bottom-up kind of prediction, you would just do a top-down 80-20 kind of approach, and the prediction would be fairly accurate. So these kind of calls, judgment calls, say, look, is it really what we do today creating any value, wasting our time on financial reporting, or should we not find an agreement with our internal customer, namely the finance team, to say, is an 80-20 okay, so we can use the 10% of the time that we're saving here on something else, right? So these are just, some things that I came across which could help us to quickly have some more time to focus on stuff that really matter.
So talking about things that really matter, and maybe this is a really simple question. You kind of started to allude to it in the last answer, but I think that it's still worth asking for sure, even if it does seem like it's a simple question. And that is, how do you actually determine what a customer really wants? Because that is the key for customer centricity. And the customer can be the end consumer, the customer can be your stakeholder. But I feel that aside from going and asking, which often we don't do, but often we do when we don't get the answers we want, what are some of the ways that we can actually figure out what the customer wants?
Yeah, no, you're right. But I always take the analogy of we build very, very good relationships in our private lives, right? With our family, with our partners, girlfriends, wives, husbands. I think that we just do it naturally to build, good, long-lasting relationships. And I think that's sometimes in the business context, we just neglect that. And for me, building, valuable customer-centric relationships is about, first you need to care. First you need to really spend the time out there with the customer to really understand their needs and requirements. And yes, it requires time, right? And then most people will tell you, I don't have the time, but it's so important to do that. That you're visible, that you talk their language, that you take them seriously, right? And sometimes that you're also a bit, caring means also sometimes, being a bit challenging, right? Is it really what you want? There's the whole discussion about wants versus needs, right? Do you really need to have a washing machine, or is it just that you need clean clothes? Because clean clothes can be delivered in certain different ways. So it's being a bit more a trusted, stakeholder, trusted partner that cares to deliver the best, and that is also there not only to say yes, but to challenge what is expected from them. The other element for me in a winning relationship is really that you need to continuously improve. Right? What you've done today might not be good enough tomorrow, so you always need to ask yourself, what can I do better? The other thing that I find that plays a part in building winning relationships is to be competitive, and I don't mean it in a way that you need to use your elbows and get everybody, out of your way. Yeah. It's more of that be ready to always, compete, to be ready to jump into the competition, even if you lose, but you're always ready to pick up the fight. And not pick up the fight is probably the wrong word because it's a bit negative, but just to be out there and try to win.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is what a customer, at the end of the day, what your partner is expecting as well, right? I mean, feedback is a gift, and try to understand what has my competition done better maybe today so that I can become better tomorrow.
Right.
And the fourth element for me is being responsive. This mentality of, well, I work from 9 to 5, and then anything that happens outside these hours is no longer my issue. Is obviously in a private context would never work, right? And a business internal customer context doesn't work either. So we need to make sure that we follow through on this caring, continuously improving, competing, and responding in a way that we cater for the needs that our internal customers have. And then you build winning relationships. And it comes back to what I earlier said. What does winning mean for you then in the end of the day as a procurement professional? What is your strategy? And is that strategy aligned with the internal stakeholder? So I think it's all around mindset, establishing that the philosophy of we are a customer organization, a service organization, and we need to build relationships on all levels, that we're visible and we understand people's needs. And again, I just want to re-emphasize that point that I made early on. It doesn't mean that we always say yes to everything. Yeah. I think our customers do expect from us to be out there and to step up and say, look, I think we shouldn't be spending X, Y, Z, or we shouldn't be qualifying the supplier. But we always need to make sure that we fully understood the business context before we just say no.
Yeah.
And I think in the past probably we've done exactly that. We just said no. Hey, look, it doesn't work.
Yeah, because we've aligned it with a metric rather than a business need.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right.
One of the things you talked about there was becoming a service organization, and that's something I really strongly believe in. And I think that comes from I didn't used to think that way, and then I became a service provider. Within a company, so managing a BPO. Which was in a captive environment. But you start to see the world a little bit differently. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us as a procurement group to really start thinking ourselves as a service provider rather than a function, because it changes so many things about the way you go about doing your business. You realize that, the company has lots of different ways they can invest their money. They choose to invest in procurement right now. But you're a sales organization. You want to be selling what we do in procurement so that you continue to get that investment and hopefully get more, versus just feeling like, we're procurement, we're here, we kind of have a right, we have a process, and we're going to stand behind that.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And we will need to get out of our comfort zone, because I think the comfortable thing is to say, well, we deliver the 3% savings and that's it, right? I mean, it is really then for me it's always around this mind shift element, mindset element, that we need to create. That understanding is probably something that you can only achieve from the very top level.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, as you discussed early on, it's not a switch that you can, or lever that you can just switch over. I think it will require time. The only concern that I have now, though, is that with these technological changes, is that there might be some elements in an organization that say, look, a CEO or a CFO might be saying, look, we have these tools now out there. We know that procurement is very transactional, or at least they give us the perception that they're very transactional. Let's just, optimize everything and just get some software tools in place. And then all of a sudden we are even
no procurement,
no longer in control of our own destiny, right? Mm-hmm. So this is probably the watch out, where I think we need to do something quick. At the same time, though, probably it's not going to be easy and an overnight kind of thing. But if we don't do anything now, I think there will be definitely some tremendous changes imposed on us without, and not necessarily us driving these changes.
Yeah, one of the first things that I always try and recommend to procurement groups to do to start building more of a customer-centric approach, I guess, and to start acting like a service provider, is to start putting in place statement of works with your stakeholders, for projects or for categories. So actually align, like, this is what I'm going to do for you. This is what I need you to do for me. This is how we're going to measure the relationship. This is what our strategy is going to be. And get everybody to sign it. And there you have a document that you're all going to work to. So there's no nuance in terms of who does what, or I only thought I was going to use you for this. It's actually pretty laid out. And then you can start putting in metrics that you measure yourself against just for that category with that stakeholder, or just on that project with that stakeholder based on what it is that they want. And start doing that start doing that at scale. Just really helps, I think, to clarify the role that you have, but also to be accountable to your role as well.
No, I agree with you. I mean, this project management approach, I see more and more organizations investing more into that than being very, very rigid in terms of we have 10 category managers and they only manage these categories and that's it. I think these flow to work kind of concept, these swarm concepts or whatever you want to call them, pretty much say, look, I mean, we have certain projects here and maybe some business units need more attention than others for a moment. So we will put some more people onto that project. I think is probably the model moving forward, to be able to really address needs where they occur and not just rigidly say, okay, we have 10 divisions or 10 categories and we'll always come up with our own projects. If the business need is somewhere else and you need more buyers and more project leaders in these very areas, then you should quickly shift your organization towards that business requirement, and that's where this element comes to play that you just described, that you need to sit down then with people. Okay, what is it that you actually want? How can I help you? How can you help me? What is the KPIs? What are the scorecards? Are we really talking about a raw material, optimization, your cost saving, or is it total cost in use, end-to-end supply chain? This is definitely very powerful. And I think we're very well positioned to be these project managers, right? I mean, yes, we might not be privy of all the, let's say when you're in a manufacturing organization, you might be aware of all the nitty-gritty details of a manufacturing process. But we do know the supplies, the logistics, the implications of certain minimum order quantities, et cetera, et cetera. These things all come together. We're like a little spider on the web, right? All these information come together in our little environment, and we can then spread them out again to the respective internal teams to bring external world and internal world together to build or to deliver on projects that deliver value end to end. So for me, the skill set of linking and leveraging, right, and to link internal and external need and leverage both skill sets together to drive whatever the result needs to be is probably the future skill set that we require as procurement, and that we should be driving and optimizing. And yeah, again, what you described, I think is exactly what that is, right? These project managers that you not only feel responsible, I do my little thing here on the side and don't care about all the rest. It is getting everyone together, getting everyone aligned internally and externally to drive results.
Yeah, to me, a lot of it's accountability or feeling accountability. On both sides, it's obviously not just a one-way street here from procurement, because how many times do our stakeholders go and do different things outside of what we've agreed, and having a way to hold them accountable as well through something that's a little bit more formal helps, at least from a project perspective. But it's one of those mindset things that by starting to do things like that just helps you to start thinking like a service provider, in my mind. So you start thinking about how can you exceed and go above and beyond, and how can you make sure that it's a no-brainer for them to come and engage with you the next time because you've just so surpassed what their expectations are. And usually we don't even know what their expectations are when you go into when you join a category, when you start a sourcing project, whatever it may be. We think we know, we make lots of assumptions, but we never really ask or document it.
That is true. And it's funny. I mean, I with the current company that I'm owning, we deal a lot with sales teams, but also with procurement teams. Mm-hmm. And you see that both sides give us pretty much the same feedback on what they think of procurement. So I mean, the sales team say, look, procurement is a blocker. I used to talk to my internal customer or to say the IT director directly, and I was selling them computers, and everything was smooth and nice and happy days. And now there's this procurement guy, and he doesn't have time, process, RFQ processes, et cetera. He or she is just a blocker. And when we talk to procurement teams, what kind of feedback are you getting from internal customers? It's exactly the same. That they're just, a process, gatekeeper and not really delivering value. So it is, and I think that's where we need to make sure that we spend our time on to how can we change that perception, how can we be that enabler, and how can we change our internal processes that are probably blocking our success, right? And it probably comes back to what we initially discussed, namely, sometimes we just need to hold our hands up and say, look, maybe we need to invest into the supply chain, let's say, and cost of that material will then go up. Minimum order quantity will go down, and that's the reason why the material cost will go up by 10%. But it will drive the agility, the flexibility that we need to deliver to the business. And on the supplier side, if you manage your supplier very well, I've seen many examples there where suppliers are very grateful that there is a procurement team, a procurement function, because we are the ones that can link you up. If you're a good supplier, if you deliver great results, if you brought us innovation, sustainability, whatever it might be, we obviously would be stupid not to recommend you to somebody else in the organization, right? And I think suppliers that have recognized that really support their procurement. So, but it's this kind of double-edged sword. We need to make sure that we explain ourselves well enough, and at the same time also address the anxiety that some of our internal stakeholders have. I mean, I saw it a couple of times, especially in the indirect area, where I think IT is a classical example where people have been buying their computers for forever pretty much, and then you come in and say, look, I don't know anything about IT, but now I'm going to buy you computers.
Right.
Is where you need to explain that you are an enabler, that you're helping them, that you're not taking decision-making power away from them, that you just want to make sure that their budget stretches longer than just what they've done before. So probably people call it sometimes customer relationship management, and supplier relationship management is probably a similar kind of set of skill sets that we need to apply to make sure that we position ourselves in a better way.
So as we wrap up, I have a question. We talked about metrics earlier. We've talked about measurements and KPIs kind of throughout the conversation, starting with cost savings and trying to move away from them, but also how we measure individuals. I just wondered if you could share, as we start to think about customer centricity, are there any metrics that we can use that actually measure our alignment with our customer, that we can actually take and that mean something, that we can start to use to replace some of those harder metrics that we're used to?
Yeah, I mean, what I always found very, very powerful is to use total cost in use, or total cost of ownership, and to probably on a project basis to really align with the internal customer what the targets are on end-to-end pretty much. To avoid this, us only focusing on the raw material or only on the supplier, we need to see it end to end. That is something very, very useful. The other element, I'm always a big fan to really challenge the organization. How can you drive more sales and grow the organization?
Yeah.
Again, this KFC example that I made early on, where by delivering better food quality, it's difficult to measure because there's so many things going on in the market, but you probably could assume that better quality could translate into more sales, more
pricing power,
customers, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. Yeah, indeed. So I think to with these kind of projects, you need to make sure that you have probably a qualitative discussion before you enter into this project with the stakeholders. Say, look, are we all agreeing that this is a good thing or not, right? Because you can always argue in many, many different ways. Has this, what we've done on raw materials, now driven actually sales, yes or no? And you can argue either way if that's true or not. So it's probably not going to be a hard KPI, but more encouraging the discussion with internal stakeholders. We are more project specific. We do more project specific work. And are we all in agreement that what we're trying to do here will drive sales, yes or no? That is probably one softer KPI. And the harder KPI, as I said, total cost in use and total cost of ownership for me is something very, very powerful, and probably we're not using it enough.
And so what I'd love to do for the very final question, and I always say this is the easy question, is that if listeners would like to connect, reach out, learn a little bit more, learn a little bit more about your company as well, where would be a good place for them to find you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn or on our website, FIVIS.io, so it's FIVIS.io.
Great. What I'll do, I'll include that in our show notes today. I'll also include the link to your LinkedIn profile for folks to contact you directly over LinkedIn. I'll put those all at artofprocurement.com. That's where we have all of our podcasts hosted and all of our show notes. So that's artofprocurement.com. So Jens, one last time, just thank you so much for joining me today.
No, Phil, thank you very much. Really, really great chat. And let's make procurement great again, right?
Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.